And they knew I was one of those crazy Bitcoin people. So they came to me and said, hey, how can we use this? And so there's probably about 40 different circular Bitcoin economies out there. We were shocked. We had, the young kids that were working with us that would save up enough to buy a phone or, a new bike or a motorcycle. And these were kids that had never saved before.
I'm sure it excited them a lot.
Yeah. When people make that jump from just seeing it as digital gold to seeing it as freedom money, like to me, that is the important jump for them to make.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, Mike Peterson.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for being with me. Thanks for agreeing. I know you're very busy. You're very popular and people want to talk to you.
Oh, no, I look forward to this type of thing.
Cool. So yeah, I'm excited to actually meet you in your base in El Salvador very, very soon.
You haven't been there yet, right?
No, okay. It's going to be my first time.
Nice.
And I'm so curious. And I've been following your work and everyone's work, everyone that I know that lives there. And I've read your story that you've published a couple of years ago in Bitcoin Magazine and about the meeting you once had. So I'd love to introduce to my audience who you are, what happened back in, was it 2019 when you had that meeting?
2019.
And then in 22 when you started rolling out this vision and where we are today.
Well, no, we actually started rolling it out in 19.
In 19?
Yeah, okay. It was just later that the government made the official decision to adopt it.
So let's start from the start, where it started.
So we had been living in El Salvador for a number of years, working in the community there. For people that know some of the history of El Salvador, for the past between 2008 and 2016, it usually had the highest murder rate in the world, and it was, I think it got up to 120 murders per 100,000 people per year. So it was off the chart, higher than most war zones, and it was, the gangs really controlled, huge swaths of the area, including the small town that we lived in. And so we were working within the community to really try to keep the youth out of the gangs, to encourage them to continue in school, and to...
How did you get there in the first place?
I went there on a surf trip.
Okay, so you're a surfer.
Yeah, so I went there in 2004 on a surf trip, and just fell in love with the people, and they have good waves there, the water's warm. So we decided to buy a place there, and then... over the years, we got to know a number of people, and we were attending a church in the capital city and got to know people that were running children's homes and a couple that was working with women who had been victims of sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to move down to El Salvador to kind of support all these organizations behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And then also in the community where we're at in Zonte, get involved with the youth there. And so that was, we had a business in the U.S. that we'd go back, and it was seasonal. So we'd go back every year for 3 or 4 months, run our business, and then come the rest of the year in El Salvador. And through some connections, but still wanted to use the Bitcoin they had to do something good in the world. And so they had hired somebody as an intermediary to kind of shield them. And so we just presented what we were doing, and I understand their vision that the donor wanted to see circular Bitcoin economies started and people really to leave the fiat world. And so came back to them with this crazy proposal that, hey, we'll do it, in this community that we're living in and a part of. And I thought for sure they would say that's crazy, but they went along with it. And so, so that's how it all started. And so we started just injecting Bitcoin into the community through, incentives and incentivizing kids to stay in school, to get good grades, to clean the river and the beach. We'd pay them in Bitcoin, and, through that, then they had Bitcoin to spend, and
but
the
you
stores.
Didn't just hand it out. You wanted them to do
we found that it's very important that people have skin in the game and that they earn. Now, we did shift a little bit because then COVID hit, probably 3 or 4 months after we had started. And at that time, people were going hungry. They couldn't work. And El Salvador is a very poor country, so hardly anybody has any savings. Even, most people only have 1 or 2 days worth of food in their home. It's not like in the U.S. where, at my house in the U.S., I could go for 2 weeks probably on the food I just have in my pantry and refrigerator. But they couldn't work. They didn't have any money to eat. And so at that point, we felt okay kind of shifting during that time, since people weren't allowed to work. We started doing distributions of Bitcoin to, it was probably 90% of the families in the community.
Wow.
And so we were sending them, it wasn't in dollar terms, it was probably $40, $50 a month that we were sending them. It wasn't enough to cover all of their needs, but it was enough to cover, they could buy their basics, their beans and their tortillas. And so through that, it kind of turbocharged the use of Bitcoin, because all the stores wanted to accept it, because that was all everybody had. And,
Wow.
the people also had the time, because they were bored. So they had the time to,
Learn
dig
about
into
it, yeah.
Bitcoin and to research it, because nobody could work during that time. And so it was kind of weird how, that all came together. And I feel like that had a big impact on the uptake of Bitcoin. And then obviously once the COVID lockdowns ended, we pulled back from that, and we pushed more into, we did have like a work program, because a lot of people were out of work after that time, and the businesses were kind of slow to rehire. So for the few months after the lockdown ended, we paid people to repair roads and do things like that. And, but with the incentive to get them back in the regular workforce.
Right.
You're the Voice is brought to you by Trezor, the original Bitcoin hardware wallet company pioneering the development of self-custody for crypto assets since 2013, empowering individuals with an open-source device, enabling beginners and experts to easily and securely hold their coins. I find my Trezor super easy to use and recommend it to my friends and family. Enjoy my 5% discount on Trezor products by clicking the link in the show notes and using the code FLAT.
Did El Salvador go all in on the lockdown
Yeah.
thing? Or?
Oh, they went
really?
totally all in.
beginning,
Yeah.
they
In the
actually
very
bought
beginning,
the whole thing?
I was very against how they handled it in the beginning. But to their credit, they reversed course before most people did. So they actually locked down in El Salvador before they even had one case of COVID.
Oh,
and just like overnight, they closed the airports. It was a very strict lockdown. They had soldiers on the street.
Oh.
You weren't allowed to. Yeah, it was. I totally disagreed with the way that they did it.
And then they realized that it
But
was...
then I think they realized, like, this is crazy. Like, it's not, one, it's not helping. Two, it's actually hurting people and have them locked in their homes. And so as other countries were actually just implementing their lockdowns, El Salvador reversed course, encouraged people to get outside and get sunlight and exercise, and lifted the lockdowns. And then actually, I think Bitcoin played a big role in that, because they had Bitcoiners speaking in to the government. And even the first year that they did the Adopting Bitcoin conference, mid-conference, they got rid of the requirement to have the
social
either
distancing?
no,
or
the testing requirement.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so because they were having speakers and stuff that their tests, their flights got delayed and their tests weren't valid anymore, and so they were being locked out. So they got rid of the testing requirement.
I am impressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like I said, I didn't agree with the way they handled it first,
Yes.
but they definitely reversed course and overall, I would say they did a good job.
Okay, good. Wow. Okay, so then you started, and this is when COVID started to fade, then you were helping stimulate the local economy in Zonte,
Yeah,
right?
we did.
And then,
We did a number of things too. Also with businesses, we said, "Hey, we'll pay half the employee's salary in Bitcoin if you'll rehire them," because businesses were afraid to rehire. They didn't know, is the economy going to come back? And so we did a lot of things to try to get people back to work.
did it work?
Yeah.
Did they rehire people?
It was. We had in El Zonte, it recovered much quicker than the other areas, and I think it hasn't stopped. It just keeps. We had the +2 of now all these Bitcoiners were flowing in,
Right.
and so the tourism was off the charts, and so yeah.
How many people live in Zonte, more or less?
It's about 3,000.
3,000.
Yeah, it's a very
Okay.
small community.
Okay, and the whole community today, you can say, is aware of Bitcoin or using Bitcoin. Like this is
Yeah, I would. Oh, everybody's aware of it for
Aware.
sure. I would say probably 90% of the families have used it at some point. I would say probably the majority of the families use it at least once a
regularly.
month.
Yes.
Yeah, and almost all of the businesses. I'd say probably 80 to 90% of the businesses there accept Bitcoin. So.
Did it do anything to their savings consciousness?
Oh.
Can you talk a bit about that?
El Salvador historically has not had a culture of savings at all.
Yes.
So I think part of that is because a lot of money comes from remittances, and
Yes.
so it seems, people are receiving it, they're not really working for it, so they're quicker to spend it on fast food or El Salvador's super poor, but you look at all the fast food restaurants and you're like, how do these like stay in business? Well, a lot of it's because you have this kind of welfare type money that comes in through the remittances. And so historically, people have just not saved. Also, just with the history of the gangs there and extortion and people not knowing if they were even going to live another year. They kind of had this thing of live for the day. And once they started using Bitcoin, you see this kind of shift in their mind because they're like, if I spend it now, it probably can buy me twice as much if I save it. And so you have them start thinking about saving for the first time. And we were shocked. We had, the young kids that were working with us that would save up enough to buy a phone or, a new bike or a motorcycle. And these were kids that had never saved before.
I'm sure it excited them a lot.
Oh, yeah. And just, I think, too, to be able to see that, for them to understand the first time what money is, that it's kind of their stored energy and effort and value.
Yes.
And so if they spend it now, they're not going to have it in the future. So the whole deferred gratification thing really started to click for them. And we saw that kind of bleed over into education even, where they would start thinking, well, it's better for me to stay in school because even though I'm not earning a wage during that time, I'll be able to earn more in the future and have better opportunities. And so Bitcoin does change people.
Yeah, I guess also on the moral level, the self-fulfillment that you feel when you see that you can actually create the fact that, you now have a phone, you now have a means of communication, for example. And I did that. And then you start rebuilding your confidence in yourself. And it's like a self-sovereignty, circular process kind of thing.
100%. And you don't have any gatekeepers telling you can't do it. So
right.
like for a lot of people, they couldn't get bank accounts or the banks would charge them so much fees it wasn't worthwhile. And so they never started this process of really engaging in the financial system. Now they're able to kind of leapfrog and bypass that and have this self-sovereign financial system.
And how is it at large outside of El Zonte, inside maybe San Salvador or even greater El Salvador?
So there's definitely, it's not like everybody's using Bitcoin. But the majority of purchases in the country are still made in dollars for sure.
But it's a process.
Yeah, and that's what when the law first passed, I tweeted out. I said, a year from now, everybody will say how this failed. 3 or 4 years from now, they'll start to be like, well, maybe it's kind of working. And a decade from now, everybody will say oh, it was obvious. And so that's been really interesting to see is. That's actually what's happening. We see now, all the major supermarket chains now take Bitcoin, the major department stores, we're seeing gas stations now, and then just thousands of local small businesses. And so initially there was a lot of people that were hesitant, and even people that we went to talk to, no. Now they're coming to us and saying, okay, how do I onboard to Bitcoin? Wow. They see that the businesses that are accepting it are thriving and are getting more customers and are saving and having investment money to grow their businesses. And so we're seeing this FOMO, but in a good way, hey, this is we're missing out on this economic opportunity.
Amazing. Does it help to get all the Bitcoiners coming as tourists to stimulate that even more?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So one, that's a huge injection of Bitcoin into the economy because when you're Bitcoinizing an economy, it has to come from the outside. Yeah. There wasn't much Bitcoin in El Salvador prior to when we started. And so now you have this injection of Bitcoin into the economy. But it also, I think, helps show people wow, nobody used to want to come to El Salvador. And now we have people from all over the world that are not just visiting, but a lot of them are moving there, moving their families there. And so I think for them, that makes them realize, wow, Bitcoin is a real thing that's going to be really important. It's bringing conferences. It's bringing, the number
education.
And just the amount of investment that's coming into the country. There's, been probably a couple dozen billionaires that have come to El Salvador where in the past, nobody would have had any interest of even, they'd be scared to even stop by. Now you have people that are there looking to invest in the country. And so the local people see this and realize that there's a transformation happening.
Wanting to learn.
Yeah.
Look at that case study and learn. Okay, and so I have a couple of things I want to take you to. First of all, I saw your interview with Murph. And the kind of stuff he does there. And I'm like, okay, so Mike is completely viral because people are looking at you, what you have done, how you have kind of infected your local community with your passion, but with this also with this very practical solution for life. And now you get other people coming in and doing similar things like smaller communities, projects, and it's just starting to like virally take place. And I find that so inspiring and so amazing. So on your podcast, you interview all these people that have all these amazing entrepreneurship projects or initiatives. So can you tell me a bit about like how do you find these people? Do they find you? How does it? Is it really a viral effect that you're noticing?
Yeah, I mean, mostly they'll reach out to me, and and that's what I love about the podcast. I get to know all these people that otherwise I wouldn't get to know, and in that format you can dig deep really quickly,
Yes.
and so you can get to know people like
Also, with Murph, but also your episode. I'll recommend to the audience your episode with Mi Primer Bitcoin with John and with Lena.
Yeah.
Both great projects.
No, I feel so fortunate because I get to, I get to sit down with all these amazing people, and a big part of my time now is devoted to we're working with all these Bitcoin circular economies around the world, and so we do a lot of coaching and a lot of supporting with them, we're very careful.
You have
We
your
don't want
own community of
Yeah,
like community
there's-
builders.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's probably about 40 different circular Bitcoin economies
Yes.
out there.
Yes.
And initially there was a lot of pressure on us, like, hey, you guys need to be in charge of this, and we're like, no, it needs to be decentralized like Bitcoin.
Nice, yes.
We'll help, we'll share what worked for us, what didn't, but each community is going to need to figure out what works for them. And so right now we try to just focus on being able to support all these other communities that are out there.
Costa Rica, South Africa, and
Brazil.
Brazil.
I mean, in Africa, there's probably at least a dozen that are there. There's even some that are springing up now in the U.S. And so it's Latin
in the
America
US?
is really big. In L.A., there's somebody starting one, and there's a big Salvadoran population in L.A. and so they're focusing on that. But yeah, so we're seeing all these things pop up all over the world, and that's what's so exciting to see it kind of ripple out. And in El Salvador too, there's Berlin now, which is a kind of community in the coffee country that has really replicated what's happened in El Zonte, and so
this is Berlin, El Salvador.
Berlin,
for people
Berlin, El
that
Salvador.
Don't
Sorry,
understand.
yeah.
People think Berlin, Germany.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is it's funny. The Berlin, El Salvador was actually founded by people
From
Germany.
Berlin? From Germany.
From Germany. So, so it's interesting to see.
And shout out,
this kind
speaking of Germany, our German friends in Indonesia as well, in Bali. Doing
there's a
amazing
big
work.
project in Bali, and so like in Bali they have
I have goosebumps like just hearing all the names of the places.
in Bali they have some unique challenges because they're not allowed to use Bitcoin as to purchase things by law, but they found kind of a workaround way to do it, and so each community finds their own way of meeting the needs of what's happening in their local area.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about the IMF, but before that, because I'm all like goosebumps, why are you in Bitcoin? Like, what is this for you? What does it mean? Because your ripple effect and your impact is so big, the way I see it, and I guess you know that. I guess you feel that. Like, so what does it mean for you? Yeah.
For me, it's always been, I came to it through the monetary side. People who know me know I'm not a
like
technologist at all.
Side?
And not so much investment, but just seeing how monetary systems impact. Like, why are some countries poor and some countries wealthy? And obviously there's a lot of complex factors that come into it, but the monetary system plays a big role in that. And so for me, I've always been wired as a libertarian and feel that government shouldn't control money. And so when Bitcoin came along, I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. So that's kind of where I was drawn into it. I learned the technology side, as I went. That was more of the challenge, where a lot of, some people in the space come in it from the technology side. But for me, it was definitely the money. Bitcoin is money.
Amazing. And you feel like what you're doing today is like walking that path, like actually implementing the vision?
I mean, I feel super fortunate just to be able to kind of focus on that. It's to see Bitcoin actually being used day to day, transactionally. It's interesting. You come to the Bitcoin conferences, even like we're here in Lugano, And, a lot of the people here maybe haven't even ever bought anything with Bitcoin in their life. They haven't understood what it is to use Bitcoin as freedom money. And so we love being able to share with people, and even seeing what's happening here in Lugano, where now all these businesses are accepting Bitcoin. And, I think for when people make that jump from just seeing it as digital gold to seeing it as freedom money, like, to me, that is the important jump for them to make.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so when you see, what's your take on the statement of the IMF about El Salvador recently? They came out and said El Salvador may be going too far or too fast with their implementation of Bitcoin. Maybe we need to curb their enthusiasm a little bit. What's your take on that? What do you make of that? And how do you think Bukele and the state sees it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody in the Bitcoin community is shocked that the IMF doesn't like what's happening in El Salvador. But I think you see in their statements that they're backtracking. When it first happened, they were like, no, they were basically demanding that El Salvador totally walk away from Bitcoin and get rid of that, and we're threatening them. And El Salvador has just pushed forward. And so now you see them kind of like, well, we're encouraging them to put some curbs on it or to go a little slower. But I think they're being forced to walk back by the fact that the government in El Salvador has stood firm. It's like, we're not going to be controlled by the IMF or any outside forces. That, they have their own independence and their own sovereignty. And so they've made this decision. And so I think the IMF is going to buckle. And I think that they see this coming, that as countries start to adopt Bitcoin, it's going to make the IMF obsolete. So I think that is their fear. And, obviously they want to be able to control things. And when they have countries under their thumb, they can dictate terms to them.
Do you think they're not going to try and use any, severe measures to stop El Salvador? I don't know if they can. I'm just asking.
Yeah,
because they have done similar things to other countries in the past.
No, and I think that they will make some attempts, but I think that Bukele is just a very sharp leader, and I don't think he's going to get boxed into a corner. And so I think they're going to try to find a way out that saves space for them. But I don't see the government in El Salvador buckling to their demands. They've received a ton of criticism, since the beginning. And when they started, it was when Bitcoin price was going down. So it would have been very easy for them to walk back from it. And most politicians would have. But they stood firm and said, no, we have a long-term vision with this, and we know where Bitcoin's going. And so, I don't think the IMF is going to have any real sway on them. I'm not saying that they won't negotiate with them. They have to be pragmatic too. And but they're making big decisions to make sure that the entities like the IMF can't control them. Their recent budget that they announced, I believe they cut the budget by 10%, and it's not. Yeah. A lot of times when governments talk about cutting, they cut from what they planned on increasing. And so instead of increasing 10%, we're only increasing 5%. So we cut it by half. They'll play games like that, where El Salvador is literally spending, their proposal for the budget is spending 10% less this year than they spent last year. And to not have a budget
reliant
deficit.
on the
you see them kind of shifting away from, the past. Governments would do anything they could to get money from the IMF.
Exactly.
The reality is most of the time they weren't going to be in power when it had to be paid back. So for them, it was free money, and they would skim some off the top and, not worry about the consequences. So I see El Salvador's kind of pushing back on that shows just the strength of the leadership there.
That's spectacular. Okay, so when I come to El Salvador, I would love to sit with you for a longer talk, to go deeper on some of these topics, but also more about you and the kind of work you do there. And so I encourage my audience to start following you on Twitter, where they can follow you.
So they can follow us. Bitcoin Beach is our Twitter handle. And then we have a podcast and YouTube at Live from Bitcoin Beach.
And Bitcoin Beach is not just the name of the place, right? The name of an app, or
no? So Bitcoin Beach was just the name of this, the idea to basically Bitcoinize the whole coastal area of El Salvador. And so for a lot of people, they now think of El Zonte as Bitcoin Beach because that's where it started. But more, it was just kind of a grassroots dream of, let's see the way Bitcoin can impact the whole coast. And so that's kind of the bigger goal. And originally there was a wallet that Galloy, the company,
Yes.
developed. Specifically, they came and saw what we were doing, wanted to participate, wanted to build a wallet that was not built for tech people, but for people on the
People on the
ground.
ground,
And
yeah.
so they built a wallet, which we called the Bitcoin Beach Wallet originally. We've since changed the name, and then the wallet has been changed to Blink. More because it wanted to grow outside of El Salvador, but also we just wanted to, represent the difference between the grassroots project and, the wallet as a commercial endeavor. And so we felt at that time it was good to have a little bit of separation, just so. But we're still, we love the wallet and everything they've done, and yeah, it's been an amazing project. And it's really, I think, without the wallet that they developed, I'm not sure if the project would have been nearly as successful because it really made it easy for the businesses and people to use.
I use Blink as well. It's the same one, right?
Yeah.
So I use Blink too.
Yeah,
People can just download it and use it. So
It's very easy. Yeah.
Very easy.
Unless you're a U.S. citizen, they block you right now.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's like now it's like if you're from the U.S. or Iran or North Korea, we're on that list now.
U.S., Iran, and North Korea are on the same page right now.
It is.
Isn't it
In most
insane?
things, yeah. It's like you're
Where
a
did
huge
we get
disadvantage
to?
if you're an American. So it's crazy.
Damn, what's happening
I
to
know.
this world? Wow. Okay. Right. So, Mike, any like last thoughts, things you want to share with the audience? They're gonna see us soon in a cool long episode. But until then, any thoughts you want to share?
I just encourage people coming to El Salvador. There's been a ton of like hit pieces and negative things written about the country. And so I encourage people to get their feet on the ground there and see it for themselves.
Yeah,
because
people
it's really being
can't
transformed.
believe that that's happening so quickly as well.
I live there and I'm like, 1 week to the next, I drive down. I'm like, wow, they're building more here and they're improving this. And so it's, yeah.
Wow.
When I come back from this trip here to Switzerland, I'll go back
you'll be
and there'll
surprised.
Stuff that's happening there.
It reminds me of my son who's now he's 15, but when he started like growing physically, 13 and a half,
Yeah.
every morning I would wake up, he would look taller. And I'm like, what happened during the night?
Yeah, I have a
It's like that,
17-year-old
right?
that's the same way. It's just like, whoa.
So it's like that in El Salvador. Okay, I'm coming to see it with my own eyes. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate your time.
Well, we look forward to having you in El Salvador.
Thank you.